They say the Crowe Ranch used to shine like a silver river under the sun, stretching wider than a man could ride in a day. But if you'd seen it in those years after Elias Crowe's heart broke, you'd have sworn the land itself was grieving alongside him. Dry wind dragged through empty corrals, carrying the rasp of loose nails on old beams. Grass that once brushed a horse's belly now crunched under boot like dead leaves. The cattle, thin and restless, kept to the edges of the property where the earth still held the faintest memory of water. And the creek, the very vein that kept the ranch alive, had shriveled into a narrow ribbon of mud, thick enough to stain but too thin to save a herd. Now, I ain't telling you this is gossip. No, sir. I speak it the way the land remembers it, for I've walked those fields when they still breathed, and I walked them again when they were dying. As for Elias, well, folks whispered he died 2 winters ago, the same night his wife did. Maybe his body kept walking, but his spirit sure didn't. He moved like a ghost in daylight, shoulders bent, beard untrimmed, eyes hollow as dry wells. He'd rise before dawn, but only because grief don't let a man sleep long. He'd check the fences, though most were broken. He'd stare at the gray skies, waiting for rain that never came. And he'd sit by that old rocking chair on the porch, the one his wife used to mend clothes in, rocking it with a single push of his hand as though her shadow might return to fill it. Some townsfolk from Red Hollow claimed the ranch was cursed. Others swore the land was simply reflecting the man who owned it. But me? I reckon sorrow has a weight heavy enough to sink even the strongest soil. Still there were signs, quiet ones, easy to miss unless you knew how to listen, that the ranch wasn't ready to die just yet. A hawk circling low over the north pasture, same as it did in the good years. A stubborn patch of sage that refused to brown out with the rest. A half-forgotten trail of hoof prints leading toward the horizon, as if expecting someone to follow them home. And sometimes at dusk, when the sun bled red across the sky, Elias would stand on the ridge and look west, the direction riders come from, with a strange flicker in his eyes. Something searching, something waiting. The old stories say the frontier has a way of sending help when a soul is on the edge of breaking. Might be a stranger, might be a sign, might even be the last person you'd expect. But whatever form it comes in, it always arrives riding against the wind. And that, my friend, is where this legend truly begins. Now, if you listen to the old-timers in Red Hollow, those who sit outside the general store chewing tobacco and pretending they've seen everything, they'll tell you there was nothing remarkable about the afternoon she rode in. Just a hot breeze rolling down Main Street, dust shimmering like broken glass in the sun, the saloon doors creaking their same tired tune. But those men weren't watching the sky. I was. And I swear on every tumbleweed in the territory that the wind shifted the moment she crossed the ridge, as if the frontier itself took a breath. Her name, as we'd later learn, was Mara Lyndon. She came riding a tall, dark gelding whose ribs showed, but whose eyes burned fierce as wildfire. Her hat was pulled low, shadowing a face carved by sun and hardship, a face that didn't beg for sympathy nor warn for trouble, but hinted it had survived both. Her clothes were travel-worn, her boots cracked, her saddle patched more times than a church quilt. But she sat that horse like someone who'd been riding since she learned to walk. A drifter, the town decided. A widow, some whispered. An outlaw in hiding, others muttered under their breath. But the frontier knows truth better than people do, and the truth was simple. Mara rode like a woman who had no home left to go back to. Only places she had yet to see. She stopped at the Crowe Ranch without hesitation, as though she'd been drawn there by a hand unseen. Elias stepped out onto the porch, wiping dust from his brow, ready to turn away whoever dared disturb what little peace he still clung to. But Mara dismounted with a calm that silenced even the cicadas. "I'm looking for work," she said, voice steady as a steel rail. "Not hiring," Elias replied, colder than the shade he stood in. "Didn't ask if you were." She walked past him toward the corral, inspecting the cracked boards, the dry troughs, the sagging gate hinge. A ranch on its last knees, but not beyond saving, not to eyes like hers. Elias watched her, torn between irritation and the faintest spark of something he hadn't felt in years. Possibility. "You know ranch work?" he asked finally, arms crossed. Mara turned back, meeting his stare. "I know survival." That enough. It was. By nightfall, she had mended a fence, calmed a skittish calf, and cleared a path to the north pasture Elias hadn't walked in months. She slept in the old bunkhouse, no complaint, no questions. And from the first light of dawn, she worked. Hard, quiet, efficient. Day after day, the ranch began to breathe again. Brush cleared, troughs patched, fences tightened, cattle steadied, and Elias, well, something in him lifted. Only a little, like a shutter opening, just enough to let in a sliver of morning light. But the land wasn't the only thing stirred by Mara's arrival. A man named Drexler Boone, the land baron with a heart black as a mine shaft, heard rumors of a woman fixing up that cursed ranch. Rumors that didn't sit well with him. Not when he'd had his eyes on the Crowe property for years. Boone didn't believe in curses. He believed in taking what he wanted. And when he learned a lone woman had stepped onto Elias Crowe's dying land and dared to revive it, he sent riders to remind her that some things in Red Hollow were better off dead. But legends don't rise from what's comfortable. They rise from the wind, especially when the wind carries change. They came like shadows that had learned to walk in the dark, gliding over the hills and crests under a crescent moon. Boone's riders, 6 men in dust-stained hats and cruel smiles, thought the Crowe ranch was ready to break. They thought a grieving man and some unknown woman could be intimidated with a few threats. They were wrong. Mara Lyndon waited, not behind cover, not crouched with fear, but standing where the moonlight painted her figure long and unbroken. Elias, at first, froze in disbelief. He had never seen courage like it. Not in men, not in women, not in himself. The first shot rang out, sharp, echoing across the dry creek bed. Mara ducked, rolled, and returned fire with a precision that made even seasoned riders flinch. The bullets weren't just bullets, they were statements. Every pull of her trigger was a story told of survival, of pain endured, of battles won and lost in places no one dared speak of. Elias's heart hammered in his chest, a rhythm he hadn't felt in years. He realized then that this woman, this quiet, mysterious force, was something the frontier had whispered about all along. Not a drifter, not a widow, but a survivor, forged in fire and shadows. The men pressed harder. A trap at the north pasture, a stampede set to crush what little life remained in the herd. Mara countered every move, cutting off their escape, guiding the cattle to safety, all the while moving like someone who had danced with death before. "Who are you?" Elias yelled across the chaos, ducking behind a rail as Mara fired again. She didn't answer. Her eyes, sharp as flint, told him more than words ever could. "I am here. I'm not afraid, and I will not fail." By the time the night ended, Boone's men lay scattered, licking wounds and shame. Mara stood alone, hands steady, shoulders squared, the faintest trace of blood on her cheek. Elias approached her, awe and disbelief mingling in his gaze. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked, voice trembling. Mara's lips curved into a half-smile, half-secret. "Learned? No, I survived," she said. The townsfolk began whispering, voices low and wide. Some swore she had fought in wars far from the prairie. Others muttered about dead husbands, outlaw pasts, and revenge that cut sharper than knives. But the truth is always stranger than the stories people tell. And Mara carried it in silence. In the nights that followed, Boone tested them again. Small raids, subtle threats, stolen water barrels. Mara met each with an uncanny mix of patience, cunning, and precision. Elias began to remember the man he used to be, slowly stepping back into his own boots, feeling the pulse of the land beneath him and the pulse of courage inside him. Yet even in victory, tension clung like dust to their skin. Mara's past was a shadow that neither sunlight nor whiskey could fully burn away. And Boone's obsession with the ranch, and with Mara, though he did not yet know it, meant the real fight had yet to come. Some nights, Elias would sit on the porch and watch Mara work by lantern light, repairing fences or coaxing the cattle, and he'd wonder what storm she had weathered before this one. What ghosts rode with her? What fire lived behind those calm eyes? The old storyteller says this: the frontier doesn't forgive weakness. It doesn't reward hesitation, and it never forgets courage. Mara was about to show the entire territory why some legends are born in silence, and why the fiercest storms sometimes come wrapped in the shape of a lone woman riding against the wind. Because the showdown with Boone, the one that would echo through Red Hollow for generations, was just over the ridge. And when it came, no one would stand as they thought they would. By the time dawn touched the canyon ridges, the air smelled of gunpowder, sage, and a kind of quiet that only comes before a storm breaks. Mara Lyndon and Elias Crowe rode toward Deadwell Creek, where Boone and his men had gathered like vultures circling over a carcass. Mara's eyes, hard as flint, swept the ridge. The sun glinted off her rifle barrel, and for the first time, Elias saw the full measure of her strength, not just in skill, but in the fire that had been hidden for years behind that calm, weathered face. "You ready?" he asked, voice low. She glanced at him, faint smile touching her lips. "I've been ready my whole life," she said. And the old storyteller, if he were standing nearby, would have leaned on his cane and whispered, "Some stories take a lifetime to tell, but a single moment to live." Boone stepped forward, cocky and cruel, believing he held the upper hand. "Thought a woman could fix your sorry ranch?" he sneered. "Thought you could stop me?" Mara's hand didn't waver. She fired first, a crack of lightning that took down Boone's lead rider. Another shot, another man goes down. Her rifle danced in her hands, bullets singing like justice itself. Elias, heart hammering, realized then that Mara wasn't just protecting the land. She was carrying a past he had only glimpsed in rumors. The husband she'd lost, the betrayal she'd survived, the battles that had forged her into something greater than fear. Boone's men faltered, fear washing over them for the first time. And then Mara dismounted, stepping forward to face Boone himself. No hesitation, no flinching, just fire and will and truth. The duel was swift, brutal, and unforgettable. Boone reached for his gun too late. Mara's shot struck true, not only ending the man, but breaking the grip of greed and cruelty he'd long held over the land. Elias watched in awe, feeling something stir in himself. Courage, hope, and a long-lost sense of purpose. He stepped forward beside her, no longer the broken man he had been. Together, they faced the aftermath, wounded riders fleeing, the sun climbing high, and a ranch that had finally begun to breathe again. Mara turned, softening her gaze as she looked at Elias. "Your land needed more than hands. It needed heart," she said. And the Crow Ranch did bloom again. Cattle thrived, fences stood, and the creek ran clearer than it had in years. More than that, Elias found his own heart beating steady, alive, and open to the future. The old storyteller leans back in his chair and says this every time someone asks how legends are born. Some folks say it was the woman who saved that ranch. Others say it was the ranch that saved the woman. Me? I reckon both found what they were missing out there in the dust. And if you ever ride past Red Hollow, maybe you'll feel it too. The wind that carries courage, love, and a story worth telling.